So I made a video about the recent Nintendo Direct and how the prices have been increasing and how I sort of took an issue with that, much like many in the community. And on that video I received a comment from someone who said that they were kind of tired of seeing these complaints and maybe thought that I would have had more insight in that video. So for that person in particular, this is the insight that I can offer. Now look, I'm not an economist. I took one business class elective in college, so I know a little bit about supply and demand, but I'm not the only one getting upset in the community about the recent Nintendo price increases. Now look, this video is not to only point the finger at Nintendo for these price increases. We've seen what feels like corporate greed in the gaming industry in plenty of different places before we started seeing it at Nintendo. In just this past week alone, we saw the price increases from the Xbox Game Pass, which has received so much backlash that the website to cancel your Game Pass has actually crashed. And in the same week, we saw EA sell to a private equity firm from Saudi Arabia. So this is not to say that Nintendo is the only greedy ones in the gaming industry. I myself am a big Nintendo fan. I built this channel playing Smash Ultimate with a good friend of mine. I enjoy streaming Smash Ultimate on my Twitch channel. So it's not like I'm sitting on the sidelines just sort of yelling and screaming for no reason. Obviously, we've seen increases across the entire gaming industry, and Nintendo is the recent arriver at this party. But these sort of issues about public image and public response have not really plagued Nintendo that hard throughout the years. Nintendo is actually very cautious about following gaming industry trends. Back when things like DLC were getting first announced, microtransactions, it wasn't really until recently that Nintendo started to dip their toes into that greedy little cesspool of the big four options of gaming where you have PC, Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox. Nintendo has always been the more affordable option. You were playing on handheld devices, GameCubes, Nintendo 64s, the Wii. All of these consoles were usually priced underneath whatever Xbox and PlayStation were at, and obviously PC is a mixed bag of whatever price you're going to get based on your hardware. But Nintendo has always kind of kept their prices affordable. Not only that, but their consoles affordable. The Nintendo 3DS retailed for like $250, and games on there retailed for about $40, and they were really good games. Then we entered the Switch era of Nintendo and games got more expensive. We saw the increase of price to $59.99, and with the way that the Switch was kind of groundbreaking of being a handheld / docked console, we all kind of accepted this price increase. However, now that we're in big 2025 and Nintendo has essentially just released an upgrade version of the Switch in the Switch 2, the formula really hasn't changed, so the question is, why have the prices? So, like the title says, we need to look at whether or not this is inflation or just straight up greed on Nintendo's part. So let's put on our Econ 101 hats and get into talking about everybody's favorite subject, inflation. Inflation is simply the rate at which prices increase over time. So every year we have a percentage of inflation. Usually for a growing, healthy economy, you want to keep that around 2 to 3%. Which shows that economies are growing and potentially people's wages would also be growing, but that's not really the case here. So when inflation is high, prices increase a lot faster and a lot more dramatically. Not only do prices increase, but basically your personal purchasing power, your money, starts to decrease. Now, if you're wondering where we may have experienced high levels of inflation, let me remind you of a little thing called the COVID pandemic. Back in the COVID pandemic in early 2020, as most of the world went on lockdown, so did supply chains. And because of that, supply became scarce. And when supply is low and demand is high, items can see dramatic increases in price due to the scarcity. So with high increases of demand, we saw drastic levels of inflation, where in 2022 it reached its peak at 9.1%. Like I said, you want about 2 or 3 for a healthy economy. So having 3 times above the upper limit is pretty damn bad. And the US didn't see the decrease of inflation to under 3% until about June of 2024. So this is not just an American issue. Nintendo's home country of Japan saw major levels of inflation during the pandemic years, and the Japanese economy is still struggling to this day, with the country essentially printing more money and driving up inflation even higher. Now, here in 2025, we also have the introduction of tariffs. For another quick Econ 101 lesson, a tariff is a tax on imports. So any item that is being sold in America from an outside country or outside source is subject to a tariff tax. Now the tax is essentially something the supplier will pay once they bring their goods into the country. Then either they will absorb the cost of the tax or they will increase the price of their product to recuperate the lost profit. Now, back in April of this year, the Trump administration announced tariffs, and due to these announcements, Nintendo actually paused the pre-orders for the Switch 2 in order to reassess prices for the American release. Now, once that reassessment happened, we actually found that the console price stayed the same, but accessory prices did increase. We now see Joy-Cons, which used to be already expensive enough on the Switch 1 at like, what, $70 for a set of 2 Joy-Cons. Switch 2 Joy-Cons are now being sold at $100. Now, I don't know the business end or manufacturing costs of Nintendo, but one thing that companies will do is typically increase their prices around the time of economic strain in order to keep their bottom line stable and their shareholders happy. Now, we saw this increase of Nintendo making their first party titles $69.99 with one game. I'm sure everybody is familiar with it. Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. This was the first party Nintendo title to hit the $69.99 mark, going above the standard price set for Nintendo Switch games. Now, at the time, Nintendo promised that this was not going to be the new standard, and we actually saw that as Mario Wonder released in 2023 back at $59.99. The explanation at the time given for why Tears of the Kingdom was increasing their price was given by Doug Bowser, who made the claim that Tears of the Kingdom offered a more immersive experience, and then just due to game development that they decided to increase this price. So we all sort of, scratched our heads and threw our hands up in the air and said, well, we all loved Breath of the Wild. There was still some outcry about the increase, but once the game came out, pretty much everyone sort of forgot about all that. Now, like I mentioned, the formula for gaming on the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 is pretty much the same. Play it handheld or play it docked. However, the standard for Switch 2 games has now increased to match Tears of the Kingdom at $69.99, where we see Mario Kart World, DK Bonanza, Metroid 4 Prime, and Pokemon Legends ZA all increasing to this price. Which means with taxes in the US, you're looking at $75 to play these new titles. Let me explain why I think the quality of these games does not represent the price that we pay for them. Starting with the big one from this Nintendo Direct, Pokemon Legends ZA. Priced at $69.99 with a day one DLC announced for $29.99, causing the game to be an over $100 total experience. Now, Pokemon, as beloved as it is not really doing well on the Switch. Sword and Shield was levied with very harsh criticisms about the graphics, but ultimately the game performed well enough for people to kind of push that aside and focus on content like Dynamaxing, raid bosses. Pokemon on the Switch has had a pretty shaky foundation, with the releases of games like Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu that changed up the catching formula to a more Pokemon Go-esque style. And we can't forget about the remakes of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, games that were very heavily criticized for their lack of platinum content, art style change, and overall disappointing the community that was really looking forward to Sinnoh remakes. Then came Pokemon Legends Arceus, a game that I think is probably the best Pokemon Switch title that implemented a new catching system, improvements to battling, changes to the battling system and focusing on a more single player experience. However, after Pokemon Arceus was the release of Scarlet and Violet, games that came day one with major performance issues, a virtually empty open world, no voice acting, and in my opinion, pretty boring games. Pokemon at this point began having their DLC patches, with Sword and Shield getting a DLC expansion pass, Scarlet and Violet also getting 2 expansion passes. But both were announced months or even a year after the games first initially released. To have Pokemon ZA come with a $30 DLC day one goes against another standard that Nintendo themselves set. Now, you can make an argument for Tears of the Kingdom having the game price increase. Compare those voice acting moments of Tears of the Kingdom to the emptiness of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and I really don't think that the claim could be said that Pokemon is ready to start charging more money. I don't think that we've seen any voice acting come out of Pokemon ZA so far. And with the final trailers just released and the game about a week away, I doubt that we're going to see anything like that from this game. Does it really merit increasing the price? Not to mention, while Pokemon textures were increased in Sword and Shield, textures of environments and overall quality of the Pokemon moves themselves have not gotten better at all. In fact, I'd argue that in Pokemon ZA, these battle animations are kind of getting worse, especially when you've ditched turn-based actions for a free-flowing combat system where both Pokemon and trainer are moving at the same time. It overall looks clunky and sort of breaks the formula of Pokemon battling in a way that I'm not sure if it needs to break this way. If we look at some of the textures for background buildings in Lumio City, the only city that you're able to explore in this game All of these are square building assets with essentially wallpaper pasted on top of them. The buildings may look like they have balconies, but none of them are actually functioning with characters able to stand on there. It makes Lumio City look like a collection of streets rather than a full-blown city that you're supposed to explore. And the fact that they've revisited the Kalos region while only limiting it to Lumio City, I think is a pretty big disappointment, coming from someone who really loved XY. The console itself just doesn't have the hardware power for a $450 price tag with $70 games. Now yes, we are at a historic time of economic struggle in not only America but the rest of the world. But Nintendo is by no means a struggling company. The Switch was one of the best-selling consoles of all time, and the Switch 2 is now their best-selling console of all time. They are widely profitable, but to have these increases on games and increase on accessories make you wonder if this is due to economic inflation, or if this really is just the behest of some greedy shareholders. These increases do not feel like it's about covering operational costs, but instead trying to expand profit margins in this next console. Now, like I said before, I have no idea the operating costs of the business or manufacturing ends of Nintendo. At the end of the day, I could sit here and say it's greed. It could be inflation. My truth is that I think it's probably a bit of both. So where do we really go from here? The issue that we have before us is that if people are still willing to buy games of this quality for $69.99 on the day of launch, then Nintendo has already won, and they have successfully reset their price floor. And with this new reset, they will continue to nickel and dime you over accessories while selling you games of quality that is under the price that you're paying for them. So if you're hearing people complain about the cost of Nintendo games, maybe before saying, hey, why don't you get your bread up in the comment section, this is a question of value versus cost, and it is a question that everybody answers differently. For me, my belief is that if the prices are going to increase, then so should the quality. I'm not asking you to boycott the next Pokemon game, the next Metroid game. I'm not asking you to boycott the Switch 2, but I am making the point of being conscious about the decisions you're making when buying new video games. Gaming, like any other hobby, invests time and money, and you have to make the decisions that work for you. If you can afford these prices day one and have no issue with it, that's great, and I'm happy for you. But complaining about price increases is also valid, especially at a time where people are hurting economically. The best thing you could do at this moment, and something that I'm going to also be doing, is voting with your wallet. These companies can't survive if there's nobody to buy their games. So even for a small channel like mine to say that I don't accept the quality of these games for the price that they're charging is something that may help push the line forward. And it's a time where people like myself and people who share my opinion will probably be waiting for sales on games and not picking them up day one. But what do you think? Is Nintendo just joining the list of greedy gaming companies willing to sacrifice public opinion for some extra dollars and taking advantage of the recent economic climate? Or do you think that these decisions to increase prices are pretty fair game? Tell me down below in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinion, and I will see you in the next video.